This is our third installment of EK's new webinar series, which is called the Semantic Exchange. And we're finding this to be a really fun way to get to interact with people and enable you some time to interact with our thought leaders who are publishing blogs or infographics and other pieces of thought leadership on topics related to semantics. So we've heard about taxonomies. Today, we're going to dive into metadata in the semantic layer. This is a piece written by Kathleen Gullner, who is our guest for today, wearing a very appropriate metadata t-shirt. Glad to see that. And if anyone is interested in the unicorn in my background here, this is one of the unofficial mascots of enterprise knowledge. So you're seeing the UNEK corn here. So the format for this is interactive. As I mentioned, we would like to hear from you. We'll let Kathleen give a brief introduction and overview to the piece of thought leadership that she's written. And then we'll open it up for your questions. And you can feel free to drop those into the Q&A box that we have here. And we'll just kind of go through those. If you have any follow-ups, we'll make sure to get to those as well. But again, this is, very interactive. We would love to hear from you today regarding what questions you have. This is a 5-part series so far. So if you're interested in this, want to hear more, we have 2 more spots coming up in the coming weeks, and we'll be sending some information on that as well. So with that, we'll pass it over to Kathleen, who is one of our taxonomy consultants at Enterprise Knowledge. She has a great background in metadata and content as well. I'll let you further introduce yourself, Kathleen, if you'd like, and then get us started with the overview of your article.
Sure, thanks, Sarah May, and hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. Yeah, I'll keep my intro pretty brief so we can dig into the meat of the webinar. But as Sarah May mentioned, I'm a taxonomy consultant at Enterprise Knowledge, and I've been working in the industry of basically helping people find things for a little over a decade. Cool. So I think to start, I'd love to provide just kind of a quick walkthrough of some of the high-level ideas that were covered in my blog post. And then I'll open it up to the room to bring up any questions you'd like to. So the blog post in question is about metadata, and specifically metadata in the context of a semantic layer. So for anybody who is perhaps uninitiated with the idea of a semantic layer, the basic idea is that in contexts where we have assets stored on many different systems within an organization, and we need a way to bring those assets together to generate sort of unified user experiences like enterprise search or enterprise analytics, or any instance where we want to be able to grab assets from different places in the organization and bring them together. The semantic layer is one powerful option for doing that does not require actually moving everything to one place, which naturally in many contexts is not practical. So in the context of the semantic layer, the metadata provides a really key, even foundational role because it helps us identify the characteristics of those assets that we might want to grab out of our semantic layer kind of pool or hub of our assets. So when we say we want to be able to identify characteristics of our assets, we're talking about things like understanding what the asset is about, how that asset should be managed, or perhaps where it originated in the organization and how it has been managed up to that point, like life cycles for publication and things like that. It also may include characteristics about how the asset can be used, if there are any usage restrictions on it, or any other considerations for how it can be used. And it may also include contextual information on like who the asset is intended for or relevant for, like audience information. But all these characteristics are captured in kind of a standard codified way such that we can pull that into the semantic layer and use that in our enterprise search or enterprise analytics experiences as well as any others, including AI-enabled solutions like chatbots and other things. Um, so that's the basic idea of metadata and its role in the semantic layer. To extend that a little bit further, there are kind of two major characteristics for metadata that are particularly important in the semantic layer, arguably important always, but those two characteristics are that the metadata is actionable. So essentially, it should help end users do something with it. And those might be, our consuming end users, like those looking for assets. And it may also include other users, like those involved in the governance and management of those assets. So if we look at this diagram here, I have a few examples of metadata fields, very classic metadata fields, and then some of the interactions that they support that illustrate how these metadata fields are actionable. So like title, for instance, is a key one in its ability to signal to users the relevance of the asset. Does it pertain to their context? Lifecycle status is another example. In this case, we might be using the lifecycle status as a trigger for, say, a review workflow in a content management system. And then other fields like topic or document type can support discovery experiences, both browse experiences if somebody needs to look something up by topic, or document type if somebody needs to browse or search for something by document type. The other key characteristic is standardization. So in order for these metadata to be able to work regardless of what systems it's coming from, that metadata across those sister systems needs to be sufficiently standardized so that when we bring it together in the semantic layer, we're comparing apples to apples. So if we, I guess, I have a good diagram for it here. So with our topic, for instance, we want to have, a single unified set of terms that we use to indicate the topic. And then that taxonomy can be leveraged in any number of systems that include assets that need to be described by topic. And then when those assets are pulled into our unified search experience, like this case here, we're able to present consistent filters that show the same types of topics or same types of document types from across all of the assets sourced from all those different systems. So the last quick thing I'll kind of cover about this particular blog post was the final section, which talked a little bit about kind of practical steps to defining metadata for a semantic layer. One quick consideration here is that depending on where you're at with your semantic layer implementation, for instance, whether you already have taxonomies, ontologies, or knowledge graphs implemented, this step might look a little different, but the same kind of 4 core elements are going to apply regardless. And those are first, kind of determining your use cases. What are the cases where you have like an actionable, impactful need for metadata? And then the second is to get more granular and getting to know your users and the ways they need to find the assets and identifying metadata fields that capture those characteristics. The third step is to then allocate those metadata fields, so basically figure out where they're applicable. And in the context of the semantic layer, we're focusing on the metadata fields that are applicable to all assets across all systems or some assets across all systems. So this gets back to that idea of standardization, and we want to figure out what metadata fields do we actually need to standardize, or at least prioritize for standardization. And then the last step is to actually do the standardization. And in that respect, we're looking at really getting specific about what we mean for that metadata field, what's its role, what's its definition, and then also prescribing the data type and cardinality and other features of the metadata field to help control what data is captured and how, regardless of what system it's on. One other key thing to note is that you don't have to do it all at once. Oftentimes, it's best to start by selecting just a few key metadata fields and working on those. And then once you have those standardized and applied across systems, you can add more incrementally over time. But yeah, that's my quick whirlwind tour of the topic. Looking forward to hearing from folks on what questions you have and what you'd like to dive into.
That's great. Thank you, Kathleen. As people want to take some time to start entering in your questions here, oh, it looks like we have one already. Great. So we're hearing from Alexander. I'd like to, oh, okay. No questions are silly here, Alexander. This is a safe space. We're happy to have you and any questions that come along. So it's easier for Alex to look at all of this through object-oriented lens. I think we hear that a lot with our clients as well. So this is a common sort of perspective. Can we say that speaking about the assets, we can speak about them as classes in terms of object-oriented approach? In this case, metadata turns into the classes attributes, or speaking in other words, classes encapsulate metadata as attributes. So I think we're trying to determine if that's a fair sort of comparison to the object-oriented world. And metadata should belong to particular entities or classes. What are your thoughts there, Kathleen?
Yeah, in all honesty, object-oriented programming in that world is a little out of my wheelhouse. But in my understanding, that is a comparable or analogous line of thought. And I think, yeah, I guess the key driving thing is that we have that some formal way of declaring what things are and where they're applicable. And I think that can take shape in many different ways and in different kind of paradigms of implementation. Sarah May, I don't know if you have additional thoughts that you could add here.
Yeah, no, I think this is a common sort of analogy that we hear, and it is helpful to sort of think that metadata in some sense belongs to, you know, a thing that it's describing. There are some fields that are applicable across many different types of things. I think Kathleen was getting to some of those that are maybe more kind of like life cycle oriented. So those may be applicable across different types of entities. But that can be a great place to start, is what is the thing that we need to describe, and identifying those metadata fields, the descriptors or otherwise that should be attached to those. That's a helpful way to think about it. Alexander, do you have any follow-up to that? We've given you permission to come off mute if you'd like to do so.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So my main idea maybe here is that that's not just the random set of attributes, right? All these attributes, they belong to some entity, business entity. Because of that, most of the time we usually start from the analysis, what entities do you have in your business, right? What concepts you have in your business. We create a sort of the vocabulary or ontology. And after that, we start to collect the attributes or features of these entities. And all these features, they compile into the cloud of the metadata, right? But my main point is that all this metadata belong to some entities. They're not just free, right?
Yes, that's a great point. Yeah, they're kind of metadata is almost like the formalization of those kind of domain entities of higher level concepts that we have within the business. And when we're defining the metadata, and then especially when we're standardizing it across our systems, we're getting down to kind of formalizing that in a way that's explicit and consistent.
And if I may, just very quickly, in your article, I actually analyzed this article, learned this article. So in your article, you make a bridge to the user interface. So all this exercise is very useful when we're working on the user interface, right? And again, from starting based on my experience, most of the time we create the user interface based on the understanding what entities they have and what attributes these entities have. Because of that, for example, we can say, hey, this form belongs to the purpose of this form to represent some business entity, and we know exactly what field should be on this form, because all these fields, these are the attributes of this business entity, right? And more than that, we know what buttons we need to have on this form, because all these buttons, these are actionable or actions we can perform on these entities, right?
Yeah.
So all this analysis of metadata is very useful when we create user experience, user interface.
Absolutely. I think that's a fabulous point. And it can even, in the context of the example here of kind of a user search experience, you could also use that information about the entities and the types of information you expect around it to help shape how those search results are presented. So a search result for a document might look very different than a search result for, say, a contact or an expert within the organization that you could reach out to for that same topic.
And maybe Lucas comment here. So, and after that, we go to the next step and we try to understand what values these attributes may have. And most of the time we can see, hey, this attribute may have the predefined list of the attributes or values. For example, the document types, right? So this is report, this is something else. So we know the exact list of the values this attribute may have. And in this case, we create this list of the predefined values. And the user interface, we implement that in form of the drop-down list, for example, right? Or checkboxes, right? Yeah,
Yep,
thank you.
totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and those controlled lists may take the form of taxonomies, but they might be other things as well, like authority lists, say like a user list from a permission group and for authors or things like that. Absolutely, yeah, that controlled list is really important for enforcing that kind of standardization that we're striving for here.
Actually, I have more questions regarding taxonomy, but I want to allow Asa to speak.
Great. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for the questions. For others who have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. As we mentioned, no question is a silly question. And while you're doing that, Kathleen, I'd like to ask a little bit about, so Alexander pointed out metadata for the front end of a solution, so the user experience aspect, but we know metadata can be used for structured data in databases or, other types of content management. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the business use cases where metadata is used within a semantic layer?
Yeah, absolutely. So other key use cases like around data, for instance, I think a big one is analytics, the ability to aggregate data sets or data about, say, our content assets from different systems and bring that together in like a unified dashboard or reporting experience. I think that's a very common use case and very similar to in the case of the search experience, we still need that ability to identify those key characteristics of all our data and bring that together in meaningful ways so we can aggregate it and analyze it. And again, make sure we're comparing to apples in those cases to give kind of meaningful, coherent results, regardless of the fact that we're casting this net across all these different systems from where the data originated. I think another example from kind of the content management side of things would be like portfolio management and content analytics. So again, we're sourcing data from different systems, but this case, we're kind of trying to use that to evaluate what content we have in our portfolio. Maybe we're looking for gaps. Maybe we're looking for what topics of content are performing particularly well right now with users. And again, in that case, having that ability to standardize those characteristics we're capturing around our content data, our usage data, and also around the content itself. So we can bring those together into unified experiences.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Kathleen. I'll ask one more question and then we'll open it back up, maybe Alexander, to your questions around taxonomy. So, we would be remiss to leave out, of course, the hot topic of artificial intelligence. Can you talk a little bit about, we have this metadata, perhaps we have taxonomies as part of it. How are we using AI or perhaps machine learning to enrich our assets with metadata? Because I know that's a whole other set of work that we have to do to make use of metadata.
Yeah, absolutely. So with respect to AI kind of helping us complete our metadata for our assets and enrich our assets, I think there are kind of a couple key considerations. One is that there's a lot of potential for AI to help speed up metadata completion and enhance metadata quality, particularly wherever we can reduce any of the burden on human contributors. I think anybody who's spent time trying to capture metadata for assets knows that there's unfortunately a relationship between the number of metadata fields you're trying to capture and then the quality of what you actually get out of it in the end. So anything we can do to like simplify that process or assist end users in completing that metadata goes a long way. In that respect, I think there's some really interesting options for doing things like making suggestions of titles or summarizing to create descriptions. Those are things that generative AI are really good at. And users can sometimes struggle to come up with a unique and specific enough title. You can tell them, oh, the title you've put in is used in like 10 different places, but that doesn't help them come up with something better. But if AI can step in and be like, here's something we think based on the content of your document, this would be a good title, that can help speed up the process of capturing higher quality metadata. And then there's also, of course, opportunities to leverage AI to suggest tags or taxonomy assignments to assets that can provide an assist in saying, hey, we think these particular tags might be pertinent to this article. And then we have the human in the loop arrangement where the content owner or contributor can review those and say, yeah, I agree with this, or no, I don't agree with that. The one other case I'll mention real quickly is kind of more specifically for taxonomies, but that's an opportunity to leverage AI to help enrich and extend taxonomies by using AI to help suggest new concepts that could be added to the taxonomy, or perhaps new terminology that could be added as alternative labels or other kind of annotations to the taxonomy.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I know this is an important piece of work that we're working on with many of our clients is, how can we utilize AI and machine learning in order to like soften some of the traditionally manual work that people have been doing to enrich with metadata. So it's an exciting time. Great. Well, Alexander, we'd love to take a question from you on taxonomy, and then we'll close out for today.
Thank you. So actually, these are not questions. This is just to double check my understanding. So speaking about the taxonomy as the controlled vocabulary, is my understanding correct that we can create taxonomy on two different levels? And let me just very quickly share my ideas. So in case we're working with the structure of the types, entity types, for example, we have a document and we have the hierarchical structure below the document. For example, we may have the subordinated element document, subordinated policy, procedure, report, and report may have the subordinated elements, annual report, monthly report. This is the hierarchical structure of the types, and we are speaking of the taxonomy on the T box level, right? So terminological box. And in this case, this hierarchy will be part of the vocabulary, right? But on the other side, we can work on the instances of the entities, right? So for example, names of the departments in the company. These are real instances of the names of department. And in this case, this structure will be created, this taxonomy will be created on the assertional box level. So we have two different levels to create the taxonomy, right?
Yeah, and it's often a best practice in taxonomy design to deconstruct those and keep them separate. Because when you conflate them, you can end up with an overly complex and deep taxonomy, and you invite a lot more polyhierarchy than would be ideal. So in cases like that, being able to separate those two things can be really powerful. And then that kind of starts to dip our toes into ontology, and then having the ability to make the connections between those two things. To be able to say, this instance is of these types or can be one of these types.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for being here with us today. We're really enjoying this series around the semantic exchange. We love hearing your questions, and we look forward to hopefully connecting with you over the next couple of weeks in our future installments of this webinar series. So thanks again for your time, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun. See you later.